Eisentrout. He tells me he was born here. And I think everybody would agree. We all know that one. He was a golf pro, a teacher. He worked at Cherry Tree. But he also had a cottage business. But before that, his family owned the old hotel. So take it away, George.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's what we're going to talk about, this property at the hotel. I brought a picture. I think there's one on your cover, but just to show people where this is if they weren't familiar with it. This is a peninsula. This road coming down here is what's now called Eisentrout Drive. And just north of that, there's a peninsula there. This is the outlet of the lake to the west and the lake to the north and east. What you can't tell by this picture, and this is a relatively new picture, is this is where the hotel sat. It was a much bigger building. But there's quite a drop-off hill going down towards the outlet. And it goes down and then levels off a couple of feet above the water. It's not so steep here, but it gets about in here, and then it drops almost straight down, and the land down there just beats the water over about here over.
Hold the picture up, George.
Well, we can't see your fingers, George.
Tilt the pictures towards the audience. There you go.
There you go. You got it there, but it's probably a little under cover.
Yeah, not all of us got them, George.
But anyhow, this is important because it was the first development of any kind when a hotel was built there. My father bought that hotel in 1936, originally, and but we're going to go back a lot further than that. This is one of the later pictures of the hotel. That's on your cover too. Probably taken sometime in the 1930s. In fact, we'll start going back before the white men settled here. They were Indians, and I'm sure they lived there, roamed on that surface. As late as the 1950s, myself as a youngster and others would occasionally find an arrowhead buried in the grass or the ground over there. And on the east side of the peninsula, up on top of the hill here, about in here, there's a stone. It's about,
Turn the photo around.
hmm?
Turn the other photo around. Yeah, about where?
Well, it's on the east side, would be about on top of the hill, right about in here.
Let me hold it for you, George. Give you a point.
Right by his house.
Yeah. Here's the east, this is west, this is east. It's up on top of the hill, right in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And it looks like this. I'm gonna hold that up. It's about 2 feet by 4 feet long. Sorry, spectacular.
Can you see it?
What is it?
What is this?
It's a rock.
It's a rock!
I tell it's rocks here and there, but I tell people in jest that it's where Chief Canadohta is buried. That's his headstone.
It's a very unique
There you
stone.
go, that's a bit of information.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but
You can dig it up later.
It's true now, George.
anyhow, it's kind of symbolized something. It's been there as long as I can remember. Well, about 1811 is when the Indians were run out and the white men started to settle. Thomas Bloomfield came into the area and what's now called Bloomfield Township. But just about everybody was farmers in those days. So farming close to the lake was not the best area. So nobody really had an interest in doing anything, claiming any of the land around the lake at that time. It wasn't good for farming. But in 1862, by letters of patent issued by the state of Pennsylvania, this hotel property, plus another 200 acres, which included the lake itself, and much of the surrounding area around the lake, was issued to a T.B. Kennedy. It passed through several different ownerships, but the most significant, well, first I should say that in 1868, Ben Emerson and Pat Coleman of Union City, having leased this property from T.B. Kennedy, erected the hotel, 1868, over 150 years ago. And that was the first thing that was ever developed to try to attract people to the lake. It passed through different ownerships after Kennedy, but the most significant one occurred in 1887 when a group of Standard Oil executives from Titusville and Pittsburgh, as you know, their oil was first drilled in Titusville area. A lot of people got rich and made a lot of money over it. But they formed a club they called the Canadohta Club. Now remember, at that time the lake was called Oil Creek Lake. Their goal was to create a private playground for themselves, their members, guests, customers, and anybody invitees. In 1890, they erected a boathouse down on the foundation. Here's a picture taken from the lake, looking at it right here. This is the hotel, and that's that. I have another picture that was taken from the dam, where the dam is now, looking towards it. Here's the lake, and here's the hotel up here. Now here you can see a pedestrian bridge that they built to connect the boathouse to the hotel so that people wouldn't have to walk up and down this rather steep hill to get from one to the other. In 1894, owning the lake, they changed the name to Canadohta Lake, the name of their club. Well, that's how it became Canadohta Lake. Sometime in the 1890s, they must have grown in size because they erected an annex just to the east. Here's the hotel east down towards where my house is now, in that area. Here's home, right here. I got it. That's an interesting picture because it appears that a lot of people standing here with tools in their hand. I think it might have been just when they got the building was done and they were presenting it to everybody. I showed this picture once to Claire Malvin. I don't know how many people here knew Claire, but he was a lifetime resident of the lake. I would guess he was a contemporary of my father, a carpenter, very good one. And I would guess he was born around 1905. And I showed him this picture, and he said, "See that man there with a square in his hand?" He says, "That's my father." So I said to Claire, "Well, when do you suppose this picture was taken?" And he says, "Long before I was born." We put it in the 1890s, is how I estimate that. Now, previous owners of the lake and the property around the lake apparently didn't get too upset when people would enter to fish and recreate on the lake. But this club didn't like that. This was going to be their private playground. Nobody could go on the lake. If they did, they were arrested for trespassing. And there was a few rebels that persisted in doing this. One of them was Ben Ruggles, who I think owns some property in what is now called Ruggles Park. And another one was a Dr. Gear from Lincolnville. And they persisted, kept coming on even though they get arrested. They would go to court. They got a lot of allies, and they fought over this thing for close to 20 years. Ultimately, in 1911, the courts ruled that the lake was a navigable body of water, and therefore no person or group could own the waters as such. So that sort of ended the reign of the Canadohta Club. After that, they started dispersing all the property and moving on. Now, I'll show you this picture. It was dated 1911. And you can see in the picture that the annex is still there. Here, just to the east of it, the east as you're looking from the north. Here's another picture from later in the 1930s, and it's gone. Now, I asked Claire about that too. And I said, "Claire, do you know what happened to the annex?" And he said, "Well," he says, "as far as I remember, they moved it down, put it on a barge, sailed it up to the north end of the lake, and after that, I don't know what happened." And I said, "Claire, do you know when that was?" He said, "I was still a youngster." So that's why I think it occurred much closer to 1911 than the 1930s. Okay, now let's see where I go next. Well, after the club dissolved and started selling the property, there were several new owners. And in 1934, Vinnie Young, a widow from Union City, bought the property, now minus the lake now, of course, just the hotel property. And the hotel property actually consisted of this peninsula, and this road here that's called Eisentrout Drive, it went to the left, and there was a parallel road over here that ended, and everything in between there was the hotel parking lot. So that was part of the hotel property too, this parking area. But anyway, Miss Young bought this thing at a sheriff's sale. In 1934, the Great Depression was still going strong, and I suppose a hotel at Canadohta Lake wasn't the best thing you could have. But somehow it didn't stop my father from buying it in 1936, along with a partner. And they operated they fixed it up as best they could, and operated the place through the summer of 1938. And before that, 1939, they must have been able to make enough money to support 2 families and pay Mrs. Young, or Mrs. For the mortgage she probably was holding. So they had to give it back to her. But my father dissolved this partnership, set out all by himself, renegotiated with Mrs. Young. First, he leased the property back from her and operated, then he rebought it by himself this time. It was my mother. And it operated through 1939, by the summer of 1939. Well, on November the 6th of 1940, it was election day, the very day that Franklin Roosevelt was being elected to the unprecedented 3rd term as the President of the United States. The hotel burned out. At the time, there was only 3 people in the hotel, no guests. My father, my aunt, and the housekeeper. And they were unaware that the place was on fire. It started up in the roof and a flu problem. And the fire was actually discovered by Harold Weed, who had a cottage, had the farm up on Tree Ridge where they used to shoot the fireworks off. And I guess he jumped in his car and raced down there and started honking his horn. My dad was sitting there reading a book on television. And heard the honking, came out and found out the place was on fire. But all 3 people escaped, no harm, but the hotel was completely leveled. Well, at that particular time, before that time, my father had purchased some of these lots on the west side of what is now called Eisentrout Drive. He had started to build a dwelling there, and it didn't have it complete, but that's where the Eisentrout family would now make their home, and that's where I was born a few years later. I wasn't around for the fires. But anyhow, he also decided he had to do something to get ready for the 1941 summer. So he moved this top story of this boathouse up on top, placed it where the hotel is, where it was, much smaller building, and turned it into a tavern and restaurant, which looks something like this. And he had it open by the summer of 1941. I don't know if you, did you ever get a copy of this? I know Debbie took a picture of it. It's a menu from the hotel. It's a menu of Lakeview Inn, which is the name of the hotel and also the name of the tavern after my father did it. The prices on this are very, compared to what they are, since you don't have a copy, I'll read a few of them. An old fashioned was 40 cents. The whiskey Collins was 35 cents. Fuller's and Iron City beer was 15 cents. A Virginia baked ham with potato salad was 50 cents. Wow. So when I show this to people, the prices always kind of amaze them because they're nothing like they are now. But I always tell them, this wasn't a dump. This was a high-class place. So I'm sure you could have went to Union City at the corner bar and paid less. Okay, where am I at? Well, in conjunction with all this, my dad started to build cottages. And he built 5 of them on the west side of the lake, where he started. These are the 5 you can see in this picture. This is the one we lived in when I was born. And then he built 4 more over here when it had been the hotel parking lot at the time. Then he built 6 cottages down on the waterfront where the boathouse had been. And these were built in 2 and 47, 2 and 48, 2 and 49. So by the summer of 1950, we had 14 cottages down. My uncle and aunt lived in one of them and moved out when the house was built for them up where Debbie Brothers and Chris Brothers home up the road south of this area. You can't see it on that picture. And after they moved out, because we were living in one of the 14 cottages, and then the brick home, which is down here, where I live in now, was built in 1951. And we moved in there in the fall of 1951. So by the summer of 52, there was 15 rental units in the tavern. Okay, but the tavern actually operated from 1941 to 1971, or 1970, 30 years. And then my father and mother sold the license to Harold and Neva Burt. And they had the building built over on Banner Drive. It's recently was called the Fisherman's Tavern. And they moved the business there and opened it in the spring of 1971. With the old tavern and old boathouse now vacated, my father planned on turning it into a duplex rental unit, adding 2 more units to the 15 cottages. But in April the 29th of 1971, he suddenly and unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. He had a lot of the equipment and all the supplies already there ready to start this job. Well, a friend of his named Bill Regina, who had some cottages in the Ruggles Park area, was going to help him. He took over as lead man on this job and got it done. So the rental started in there in 1972. By 1974, my mother, now widowed and having 17 cottages to manage, or 17 units to manage, decided that was just too much. So she sold the 9 cottages up on the road to Ken and Janet File. They based themselves at our old homestead. We used to call it cottage number 1, and rented the other 8, similar to what my mother had done for about 10 years. And then with the sewer system coming into play and the high cost it was going to be when you had multiple units to tap on and so forth, they decided to get out from under it, and they sold all those 9 cottages to a man, Don Bova, I believe his name was, from Northeast. Mr. Bova had to have had some more subdividing the property, because the 4 cottages over here, as long as they were owned by one person, they were never allotted. That was just a parking lot. And the other 5 over here, he had to have surveyed and so forth, because I think my dad might have put a cottage straddling the original lots. So that's about all he did. I don't think he put a nail on of any of them, and he just put them back up for sale and kept the one, our old homestead, for his cottage, but sold the other 8. And now there's 9 different owners up there. These cottages have changed hands probably 3 or 4 times, some of them in this time, but they've all been fixed up very nicely, and they're summer cottages for people to use. Then in 1977, my mother decided to have the old hotel property, which now consisted of everything except the 2/3 sub and most of that parking lot, surveyed and subdivided into 8 lots, 1 for each of the 6 cottages, 1 for the duplex, and 1 for the home. There was a parking area down by the dam that the 6 lower cottages shared, and a little park down on the waterfront for swimming that was owned by all 8 of the owners. And her purpose was to try to possibly sell them in the future individually. And but in 1981, the summer of 1981, she suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. And that's when I come back in the picture. I took over starting in summer of '82, and I rented those 8 cottages, the duplex and the 6 lower ones, for 21 years, right through the summer of 2002, and then I decided I'd follow what my mother was going to do, is try to sell it, or sold them. I sold the 6 lower cars that had new owners in there by the summer of 2003. I held on to the duplex, or I tried to sell it, but it didn't go too fast, so I just decided to keep it. And about 2009, family, Jeff and Beth Harris, approached me about buying it, and they were just the kind of people I was looking for to sell it to, because I knew they'd fix it up. And so I sold it to them, and I wasn't disappointed. They turned it into a almost brand new looking place. Here's the thing, it was built originally in 1890. It was a boathouse, and they turned it in. It's got the blue. You can't see a very good picture of it here, but if you ever go by a boat or drive around, you'll. It's the big building there. It's got 5 bedrooms now, 3 baths. And they use it as a summer home. So the house is still there. I live in it, and most likely I'll die of it. So, well, that's about the end of my story. If anybody has any questions, I can try to clear up anything or try to answer something.
You have a question over